Good morning and welcome to PrattCon 2021 Tales and Tales. I am Latricia Milton, the Young Adult Services Coordinator for the Enoch Pratt Free Library System. And this year we are really excited about our PrattCon experience. Again, this year we will have a virtual experience, but we are excited to say that the game trucks are on site at the Southeast Anchor Library from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. today. So if you have some time, please stop by and check out our game trucks. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our opening session on today from the main stage. We also have a children's stage going on at the same time. We have two people that I want to introduce to you. First, I want to introduce to you a young person who will be in conversation with an amazing author this morning. Her name is Shantika Bhatt. She's a recently graduated senior from Polytech High School. And she leads the journalism initiative for Charm. It's called the Charm Report. She will be in conversation with Jerry Craft. If you have not heard of Jerry Craft, today is the day that you will be able to hear from him. He's an amazing author, illustrator, a New York Times bestseller, and he is a Newbery Medal Award winner. And to make this even more special, he has won with the very first graphic novel to ever win this award, New Kid. There's so many other things that we're going to learn about him today. So without further ado, I introduce to you Shantika Bhatt and Mr. Jerry Craft. Take it away, guys.
Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm really excited to ask you some questions. So, my first question is, could you tell us a little bit about your books, Class Act and New Kid?
Okay, good morning. So yes, Class Act and New Kid, which is the two books that you see behind me, are both graphic novels. So if any of you do not know what a graphic novel is, just think in terms of illustrated like a comic book. It's loosely based on my life and also the lives of my two sons. I was born in Harlem. I grew up in Washington Heights in New York City. And I lived in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. And I always wanted to go to art school. My parents did not want me to go to art school, so they sent me to a private school in the Riverdale section of New York City. So each day, like Jordan Banks here, I went from a predominantly African-American neighborhood to a predominantly white private school. And so Jordan Banks is 12 years old, and that's what has happened to him. So he goes back and forth to almost two different worlds each day and trying to fit in this new environment.
Great. In what ways do you think these books are similar and different? And it can be in the content of it can be about your content in the books, but also like the book making process itself.
So in New Kid, it's primarily about Jordan Banks, and Jordan meets a bunch of kids in his 7th grade year. So Jordan is like I was also. He was one of the youngest and the smallest kids in his class. So he becomes friends with two kids, Liam, who is white, and Drew, who is African American. In Class Act, which is I keep doing this the wrong side, Class Act is the follow-up book, and it's now the 8th grade year. So it's a little bit more about Drew and Liam, although Jordan is, an integral part. So it's still basically the three of them. I do things in different ways. I think, my learning curve with doing the first one as a 250-page graphic novel, there was a lot that I had to kind of learn how to do. I had never done a project that was that big, because when you look, it's like, 4 or 5 panels on each book, on each page, and it's 250 pages. So this is a lot of work. And I'm currently working on the 3rd book now. And, it's just very different each time of how I want to approach it. Sometimes I'll sketch out the whole thing first. In this one I'm working on now, I decided to type it out as a manuscript first. So I'll see, which one I like better. But the stories, there are a lot of similarities where I use humor. And, I didn't see when I was coming up a lot of African-American characters that didn't have something really heavy going on, like slavery or civil rights or the struggle with gangs and things like that. So one of my goals has always been to do like books that you can kind of relax and just see African-American kids as African-American kids, just regular kids.
Yeah, I think that's really important to show. So what do you think is like your favorite parts of the books?
Well, a lot of it. So one of the things is when I first started showing to publishers, 1 or 2 were like, well, nothing really happens. And I think what that means is that, like I said, a lot of people are so used to something catastrophic happening, So when I was coming up, if an African-American kid, the whole movie was about him going to college, in the last scene, he'd get that letter from the college, and just when he's about to open it and everything's about to be good, somebody comes up with a machine gun and just sprays his whole neighborhood or just something horrible. So they never actually got to fulfill their dreams. And I think one of the things that I just wanted to do differently was have books that you can relax, and books where, it's kids talking about their feelings and not overly done, but like, wow, I'm really bummed out because of this, or my mom and dad don't understand that. So I think the parts that I enjoy most are when the kids are just having conversations, even if they're just kind of being silly, and letting their imagination flow, because I know me and my friends laughed all the time, and we still do, which is why we're still friends. So when you pick up a Jerry Craft book, there will be some humor, there'll be some good conversation starter, things in it, and it's something that kids and their parents can read and enjoy.
Yeah. So for the people that haven't read your books yet, why do you think they should read it, and what lessons do you think they can learn from reading your books?
So with New Kid and Class Act, one of the goals that I had is, if you are African American, right, there are things that you might not have seen represented in other books that feature African American characters, because like I said, so many of them deal with, gangs, and not that those aren't important books, because they are, but it's just a different representation. When I was growing up, I grew up in New York City, and in Washington Heights, I lived in the brownstone, which is like this 3-story walk up with a cobblestone street, where most kids of color that you see in movies or TV shows live on the south side of somewhere, the south side of Chicago, the South Bronx, South Central, and it's just, afraid to go outside and things like that. And me and my friends played stickball and football and rode bikes, and I just wanted to have more of an innocence to their childhood than I think you see more so in other in other formats.
Yeah. I think you touched on a little bit of my next question, but I read that you made these books that you wished you had that as a kid. So why do you think it's important to have stories like the ones you wrote in Class Act and New Kids for the kids today?
Well, I think first the graphic novel format is good because there are kids who are visual learners. And I know when I was a kid, if I open up a book, I remember in high school having to read some books that were like 700 pages long, and I open up and it's like 4-point type. It's just, really tiny, and it's just page after page of just gray. And I just remember like a tear just coming down. Like, there is no way in the world I can ever finish this book. And the books that were chosen, the classics that, every kid had to read, it was about a family of coal miners in Europe in 1910. I'm a black kid from Harlem. I don't know anything about that. So I was never even taught how to appreciate something like that. And if any of those books did have African Americans in it, they were not having good days because they were, indentured servants or just something that, there was no joy in their lives. So if you're African American, how often do you get to get a book where, someone who looks like you is on the cover? So whether it's Drew or Jordan, or to have a hat or a backpack or a jigsaw puzzle, where they represent you, and I made sure that, I have a loving family in New Kid, has a mom and a dad and a grandfather. And, there's just a lot of humor and love, and not everything is perfect because there's a lot of microaggressions that people don't understand. Like if you're one of the few kids of color in 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade, and your teacher says, "Oh, today we're going to talk about Black History Month," and all of a sudden every kid in the class turns and stares at you, the one black kid in the class. That's not easy, And so if you're not African American or a person of color and you read this, you're like, maybe that is uncomfortable. Maybe the fact that you've been in my class for, an entire semester and I still don't properly pronounce your name as Shantika. Like, why should you still have to correct me? And I've been in your class for 8 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there are things like that I also want to point out to teachers, also to librarians, that if you're looking for a book, to not always hand you, like some horrible book that is just going to be depressing. So I just wanted to really open up this lifestyle for conversation, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a librarian, a kid, and I think that the graphic novel format really makes it more approachable for kids, whether they consider themselves strong readers or not.
Yeah, I think that's very important. A lot of the books that we were given is just straight up text, and there's a lot of kids who want to see that representation. And then even if you're not African American, reading these books can give you a new perspective of what their classmates might be going through and learning something new. I think that's seriously so important. So could you tell us a little bit about like how you became an author and like an illustrator?
So I have always loved to draw. So I always wanted to be an artist. I never really thought that I would be a writer because I didn't like to read. And I think, again, one of the reasons why I didn't like to read is I never saw a mirror. I never saw someone who was like me. If I had to read Tom Sawyer, which, we all had to do, again, the only black characters like an escaped slave, or if I had to read, something from the civil rights struggle, it wasn't about kids going to get ice cream. It was about kids being chased out of the counter where they wanted to order the ice cream. So I think that is what is important about this. And if you're not African American, and you read this, and now, you know, you meet one of the few kids of color in your class or in your school, you know, you're like, okay, if I think that all of a sudden that they play basketball and they're from a, you know, a single parent family, and they like rap and they do this, and just all the stereotypes that you see, you know, you may not even approach them, you know. And so I made sure to put all kinds of Black kids in this. You know, Jordan and Drew go to this fancy private school, Riverdale Academy Day School. There's a character named Maury who's African American, who his father is a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Then you've got Jordan's friends around his block, Kirk and Kenny, who are just, you know, regular kids. They don't go to the private school, they go to public school. And then you have some of Drew's friends in Class Act who are absolutely jealous of the fact that, you know, Drew wants to go to these schools and he likes to read, and because they kind of want to pull him down and keep them, you know, all in the same, you know, on the same level. So I just really tried to, you know, a bunch of different kinds of people, because there's not one way to be African American, just like there's not one way to be a boy, there's not one way to be a girl. So I just wanted to really touch on as many of those different aspects of life as I could.
What makes you happy that you chose this career path to be an author and an illustrator?
Because I love to do it. You know, again, I never thought I would be a writer, because I didn't like to read. And, you know, I could read. And I realized that as I got older, I could read a book on like how to invest or how to use like some software. You know, I could read a 600-page book on how to use Adobe Photoshop or how to invest money or how to garden, you know. But I almost never sat down with a book of prose like, hey, you know what? You know, it'd be really fun. I'm going to sit down with a book. It never dawned on me, books for enjoyment. And when I had my two sons, I wanted to make sure that they were not in a book desert like I was, where, you know, that wasn't a thing. So I read them bedtime stories every night. So we went from Dr. Seuss to, you know, Captain Underpants to Geronimo Stilton to, you know, chapter books like Bud Not Buddy. And, you know, then they went on their own to, you know, Wimpy Kid and Percy Jackson and, you know, all the way up to Ta-Nehisi Coates, you know. So they had this kind of trajectory that I never had as a kid. But to know that, you know, I got so many rejection letters as an author that I gave up and I started to self-publish my book. So over about a 20-year span, I self-published about 20, 30 different books.
Wow.
Work with other authors, just having, you know, again, African-American kids just as regular kids. You know, like this is one I did called Just Because. I worked with a woman named Chiquita Camille, and it's, you know, just a picture book about like an impromptu family reunion. You know, again, nothing bad in it. So when I started to see the reaction that people had of these books, and the desert that we're in, you know, this is A for Anacostia, an ABC book about the section of DC out near you guys, A is for Anacostia by Courtney Davis. And when I saw that I wasn't the only one starving for these books, then I was like, wow, I really am doing the right thing. You know, this is Baby boy, what will you be? Just a mom, you know, talking out loud about what she thought that her baby would be as she grew up, you know. And you don't know what you're missing until sometimes someone shows it to you. It's like, wait a minute, I've never seen a book like that. So that's what has really inspired me to continue to make more books.
Yeah, that's like really, really important. Representation is so important, but also like breaking down any negative stereotypes and biases that people have too. It's
Yeah,
so important.
thank you. Yeah.
So, what is like the best piece of advice that you got while becoming an author and illustrator during your time?
You know, the advice was not great. I have to say that I had to do a lot of it on my own. Um, and I think that there are some people that need to hear stuff and see stuff. And I always had more of a, I'm going to show you anyway. So if you reject my book, like I still have so many of my rejection letters where they were like, we are not going to publish your book. The first book I did was Mama's Boys, based on the comic strip that I did. And they were like, we are not going to publish this book now, and we will probably never publish it. So you might want to get that job at Wendy's or something, because, and so I went to the library and I found a book on how to self-publish. So a lot of the advice I got came from that book. And now, because if I had to ask you, okay, so when you think of famous characters from books, right? If there's a Percy Jackson, if there is a Harry Potter, if there is a Greg Heffley from Wimpy Kid, if I asked you to name the most famous Black character in any of those books, it's kind of hard. Like, who is the Black version of a Harry Potter? Not that they have to be a wizard like him, but I'm just saying, as far as popularity that you see on T-shirts and lunchboxes, it's really hard. So why is that in 2021, our characters still don't make that kind of mainstream jump, and if they did, it was more like back in the day where they would have cartoons like Bebe's Kids and something like that, the kids getting into trouble. But a lot of times I felt that people thought that, and I have to say it bluntly, white characters were for everyone, but African-American characters were just for African-American kids. But what's so amazing now is to see a book like New Kid now translated into 13 different languages.
Wow.
So in Korean, so the fact that HarperCollins took a chance on this, and they're like, hey, you know what? A good story is a good story, and now that there are kids, I do Zooms, China, New Zealand, where these books have as big of fans overseas as they do here. So again, I really thank my publisher, HarperCollins, for really being like, okay, we are going to invest in this and make this a regular book, not just a Black book that we're only going to put, in bookstores in Black locations. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't even know that. That's like, I'm sure so many people overseas and will be so like appreciative of this kind of book. So, I guess since you didn't get like the best advice from other people, like what advice would you give to like kids who want to be like you, who want to be an author and an illustrator or a graphic novelist?
So I won't say that it's easy, but I will say that, for a kid like me who was born in Harlem and did not like to read, I think the first substantial book, and I mean like a 300 or 400 page book that I ever read was maybe 11th or 12th grade. That was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And I think one of the things that I liked about that book was, first, it was about a kid. And secondly, even if he was a kid, that he had expectations and the people around him expected him to make something of himself. Whereas that wasn't something that I saw, with any Black characters. So for that kid to grow up and be the only person ever to win 3 of the awards that I have won, it just boggles my mind. I don't want to jump in front, but are you going to ask about the Newbery at all, or can I share that now?
No, you can share.
Okay, so in January of 2020, I got a call at 6 a.m., so 6 o'clock in the morning, saying that New Kid is the Newberries have been around for almost 100 years. Next year is their 100th year anniversary. And only 5 African-American authors have ever won this medal. And it is myself, Kwame Alexander, Christopher Paul Curtis, Virginia Hamilton, and Mildred Taylor. So it's the first graphic novel ever, and only the 5th African-American author. And then this is the Coretta Scott King Author Award. So it's only the second book ever. So when you think about all those books behind you, or all those books in the Enoch Pratt library system and all the stores, that only 2 books have won that. And then prior, I had won the Kirkus Award. So that New Kid is the only book ever to win all 3 of these. And with the upbringing that I had, and like I said, not being a book lover, I mean, that I think opens up the world to any of you, to really have like goals, like, hey, you know what? It can be done, So I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, you won so many incredible awards. It's amazing. Do you have any like other goals that you have in mind that you want to achieve? Not just receiving any awards, but also like a change that you want to make an impact.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, I just I have started to see that, because again, like when I had like my hats, right? So I've always done like my own products, right? So this is my Mama's Boys based on my comic strip, right? And so it's a class act hat that I made, and I've got the New Kid. And you generally don't ever see white customers wearing Black characters on their shirts, because again, people think those are only for Black kids. I've had parents send in photos of their kids, and I mean white parents. This one woman sent me her daughter, and they're in like Iowa. She has long red hair and freckles, and she was dressed up as Drew, like for Halloween. It's like, how cool is that? To see like, kids dressing up as these Black characters for Halloween, or, writing their book reports, like that is absolutely amazing. And even seeing like they're producing a jigsaw puzzle and a New Kid sketchbook, And I even signed with LeBron James has a film company called Spring Hill, LeBron James and Maverick Carter. And I signed with them, and they got a deal with Universal Pictures to make a New Kid live action movie. So how often do you get to see a movie starring African American kids that is going to be lighthearted and funny? And then I have like huge things of like, wouldn't it be great to see like a New Kid Thanksgiving Day parade float? You know, something where you just don't see African American characters making that. We see T-shirts and hats and all kinds of things. So yes, I do have very lofty goals because I think it's important.
Yeah, this is actually, I had another question that I've been personally curious about. Since I've really only talked to authors and not also illustrators as well, do you ever get like a writer's block or like an artist's block or vice versa while you're writing? Like, for example, you know what words you're going to write, but you don't know what the visuals are going to be.
Well, let me do this. So I know we're going to take some questions soon. So I want to show you how I actually draw. Okay. And so I draw in a program called Adobe Photoshop. And so it's all digital. And this is what the screen looks like, right? And basically, I don't feel like I get writer's block. And the main reason is that I don't really sit down unless I have an idea. So like the whole day to me, I feel like a honeybee where I'm just going around and gathering information, and not on purpose, but like, one day I did a comic strip where, I was in a McDonald's or a Burger King, and the guy in front of me says, hey, can I get a shake? And I said, oh, wouldn't it be funny if instead of giving him a milkshake, that he like leans over, he grabs him, and he starts to shake him, right? Which is very silly, right? But the point is, that's not something that I would have come up just by sitting down like, okay, I need to do something. So as I look throughout the day, like, when the kids used to wear their pants, really drooping without a belt, I might be driving and seeing the kid like that. It's like, oh, well, what would happen if he was running for the bus? And, the closer that he got to the bus, the more his pants started to fall down. So by the time that I get home, I've already kind of worked it out, in my head. So it's easier because I'm not just sitting down, like, okay, think, I have this, it's like if you have a paper for school, if you have 2 weeks to do it, the worst thing is to wait the day before. And I like, oh, I don't even know what book I'm going to do, so I take as much pressure off of myself as I can. And, I think I can deliver fun stories as a result of that. So I just wanted to show you my drawing process of just that, nothing really looks like anything in the very beginning. It's all just circles and squares and like an egg shape. And, I can go ahead later on and, put them in. But this is kind of how I like to start out. Okay. So I can still take questions. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I see in the comments that there are some questions. So one of the questions is, what's next for Jordan?
So I just handed in the script for book 3 2 days ago. So once that is approved by HarperCollins, I will spend the next 8 months doing that, because they take between I'd say 6 to 7 months in a year to do. And once I start, I'm working 16, 17 hours a day for, like I said, a year to 8 months to a year. So there's a lot of stuff that has to happen to do it because I drew all the pictures, I put in all the word balloons, I, put in all the text. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So my deadline is for it to come out for me to be finished February of 2022. And I think it would be out the following February.
Wow. The next question is, what are your top graphic novel recommendations for early readers?
Oh, for early readers, huh? Um, so, so I like, well, if you're talking like kind of on the same level as New Kid, Roller Girl by Victoria Jameson is one of my favorites. And the other thing is to stop having like what people consider boy books and girl books. you know, so because I think that sets up people immediately whether they're going to like a book or not. So there are books like Terry Lieberson does a series, Just Jamie, and Invisible Emmy, which I think are really good. There's a book called Forget Me Nat that is really good. Twins by Varian Johnson. Raina Telgemeier is still at the top of her game. I think Guts is my favorite of hers, but Smile is the one that basically I think set the standard, And then there is a great book called El Defo about a girl with a hearing impairment. So there are quite a few. Hey Kiddo by Jerry Krzyzewska, the Amulet series. So yeah, there are quite a few.
The next question is, have you always known how to draw?
I mean, I had a sense of it, but a lot of I put a lot of work into it, and my thing was to kind of make it easier on myself, because I think what happens is a lot of kids, they'll come out and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, it's terrible. Oh, I'm no good. And then they ball it up and throw it in the garbage. And then they go and play Xbox for 14 hours. So one of the things that I think has helped me is that I don't put that kind of pressure on myself where it's just like, I'm no good. I'm no good. And I see so many kids who are so hard on themselves, because I'll look at something and be like, okay, well, all right, that didn't come out great. How do I learn from it? And, I know that with Drew's hair comes down and then comes out, and his ear is almost like half a diamond shape, and which is much different than Jordan's ears, which are more rounded. And I just take my time. If you see these lines here, I'm coming down, and, if it's not great, then I can fix it. And if it is, then I'm like, okay, that's perfect. Let's move on. Well, it's never going to be perfect, so let me take that word back.
The next question is, how long does it usually take to complete your graphic novels?
So New Kid took a really long time. I pitched the idea in 2014, and it wasn't really signed with a publisher, with HarperCollins, until 2017. But by the time I had given it to them and they liked it, it was sketched out. It wasn't finished. It was just sketched out. So it took 13 months of taking it from the sketch stage to the finished stage, and class act, I was on much more of a deadline, but because of the COVID lockdown, I was only leaving the house once a week anyway, initially, so that was something that was just like, okay, I am not leaving the house. So there were times with class act where I would literally say, okay, one more hour. And then I'd look up and the sun was coming up. And I realized that I had drawn like, 17 hours. So I think New Kid took so long because I had to create the entire universe for it. So it's not just like Jordan. It's like, okay, so there's a kid named Jordan Banks. Well, what does he look like? Okay, so this is how he looks. Does he have a mom? What's her name? What does she do for a living? Does he have a dad? What's his name? What does he do? What does he look like? What does their house look like? So there's a lot of work. So I can't just say, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm like, okay, what color are his shoelaces? You know what I mean? So there's just so much stuff that I have to think about that it just takes forever initially to build it up.
Yeah. The next question is, what is the most challenging thing you drew?
The most challenging thing I drew. That I don't really know. Cars are still kind of tough. I don't love drawing cars. But my buddy Eric Velasquez, who is also a brilliant illustrator, we're not easy on each other. So if I say, oh, I don't like drawing cars, his thing is, okay, well, when you get home tonight, draw 100 cars until you can draw it, and it's not always the answer that I want to hear, but it's the answer that I need to hear, so it's one thing to be, it's hard without being critical for no reason. Like there are people that just like, oh, your drawing is stupid and you're horrible. Like we're not like that, so, but we don't give just idle compliments. So when something is done and we're like, wow, that's really good, we really mean it. And that's like the best compliment we could give, because we're both really tough on ourselves and each other, but again, while still having fun. So when I'm drawing, even putting like a little thing, like here's this mechanical pencil, even putting like a little clip that clips on your pocket kind of like adds to it. And people might not even recognize it, but I know it's there. One of the good things drawing digitally is that I can blow stuff up, so I can really get in and I can really get in this, and do some real nice details. All right. Any other questions?
Nope. It looks like things are good.
All right. So I am going to finish this up. How much more time do we have?
We have about a minute, so you can go ahead and finish up what you're doing. I just have a few quick announcements before we end.
Okay.
This was a great conversation, and I hope that everyone who was viewing learned a lot and enjoyed everything. Before you all leave, there's a form that's going to be posted. We are giving away 50 copies of Class Act, but you have to fill out the form in order to get a copy of the book. Our library here at Enoch Pratt has copies of all of the Jerry Craft books and many other graphic novels. So please visit one of our locations to check out, to get a library card, all of the things. The libraries are open to the public. You can check out, you can use the computers. I want to thank Shantika for doing such a great job. And I want to thank Mr. Jerry Craft for being our first guest of the day on the main stage for PrattCon. And as you all leave, if you would like to be entered into a drawing, please post in the chat your first name and the last initial. We have a drawing each session. And so we're going to enter the names into the drawing, and we'll be reaching out when your name is pulled. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
Shantika.
You're welcome. See you.